PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.
Welcome to PharmaVentures Insights at ISCT 2017 in London. Cell therapy is an industry where perhaps we need to rethink the business model of the entire ecosystem, from the researchers to the industry, the commercialization experts, the government, the regulators, the payers, and so on. Today on the show with me I have Professor John Rasko, Head of Cell and Molecular Therapies at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney. John, so you have a lot of titles. You're a professor, you're a co-chair at ISCT, many different hats. Tell us about what your activities in the cell therapy and gene therapy space.
So I head up a department of cell and molecular therapies at one of the biggest hospitals in Australia, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, where we're devoted to manufacturing human cells with or without gene modification in order to treat specific diseases, and the clinical trials that we've been involved in include haemophilia, thalassemia, graft versus host disease in people who've had bone marrow transplants, and many other aspects of anti-cancer therapy for leukemias and solid tumours. So that's the general area where we're trying to maintain a high level of regulatory compliance, safety, and ultimately, of course, benefit for patients who are in need of therapies that provide for missing parts of what medicine might otherwise not be able to offer if we didn't do this.
Now, we see a lot of collaboration in the cell and gene therapy space between researchers, industry, government, regulators, and you're a key example of that because you wear a lot of hats in different organizations. Do you see a lot of deals, whether it be licensing, M&A deals, do you see a lot of those activities within the cell gene therapy space currently?
Absolutely. So the field is vibrant with those kind of deals. And indeed, even academics now, perhaps 20 years ago, weren't quite as familiar with the path to translation, which is really at the core of the International Society for Cellular Therapies and why we all meet. The pillars of this organisation are academia, regulation and commercialisation. So that marriage between equals where we all come together in one place, joining with a vision to provide for patient care a safe, effective and commercially viable industry which allows for ultimately the benefit of everyone.
When we look at a lot of diseases that cell and gene therapies target, that they strive to cure, for example, a lot of the enzyme deficiency, rare diseases, there are currently existing conventional therapies such as replacement therapy, whether it be bone marrow transplant or enzyme replacement therapies, but they have their own shortfalls, whether it be high rate of morbidity and mortality, patient adherence, and so on. How can cell and gene therapy come in, and how far away are they from coming in?
That's such a wonderfully loaded question. I love it because the fundamental excitement around the field of cell therapy and the idea that's been evident to everyone who's committed to this field over decades is that we're talking about a living therapy, potentially a single treatment which might alter the genetics and the cells of a person for the rest of their life. So you mentioned, for example, some rare diseases like, say, haemophilia or some of the enzyme deficiencies. Yes, they are relatively rare, but they act as model systems, proof of principle systems, where when we overcome any hurdles that might include safety and, of course, the effectiveness of these therapies, we hope that one day these will expand to a whole bunch of diseases, autoimmune diseases, serious cancers, leukemias and so on, but also some 4,000 genetic diseases that affect humans are all potentially amenable to the kind of living therapeutics that we're talking about when we're imagining using cells as therapeutics.
It might seem to people outside of the cell therapy and gene therapy fields that progress has been quite slow in the past few decades. As someone who's in the core of research but also working with the industry, can you give us your 2 cents worth?
I think we have reason to be extremely excited. I think we have reached a watershed moment in the field of cell and gene therapies around the time that we are meeting in London on our 25th Jubilee, where members from the International Society of Cellular Therapies have come together from all of the regions that are represented through vice presidents. Let's mention North America, Europe and the Middle East, Australia and New Zealand, Asia, all of the core centres of excellence, Central and South America, of course, I shouldn't neglect, all of these core centres coming together to celebrate 25 years. And we have reached a watershed because we are now concentrating commercial expertise. There is an amazing amount of investment, not just in small, medium enterprises, but large biotech, big biopharma, investing in some of the truly exciting aspects of cell and gene therapies, which include the chimeric antigen receptor T-cell immunotherapies, which is a feature of this meeting that we're attending now. So many of the plenary sessions are devoted to gene modification of one's own T-cells so that they can be reprogrammed to attack cancers that are present in our body. And this is showing incredible promise, and there's now 5 or 10 years of clinical studies that are showing efficacy, the effectiveness of these therapies. And as I mentioned, hundreds of millions of dollars being invested into this specific field. Beyond that, there are treatments now using viral mediated gene therapy, so using safe viruses to ferry genes in for diseases like haemophilia, and these are now approaching phase 3 studies, so advanced clinical studies. Thalassemia, a very widespread disease that affects many people in Asia, in the United States of America, and indeed in Africa and the Mediterranean region. Millions of people worldwide suffering from thalassemia, now amenable to gene modification of their own bone marrow stem cells, which avoid some of the morbidity and indeed mortality that you mentioned in the current bone marrow transplantation-based therapeutics. So many other examples in many diverse diseases where there is promise being shown in clinical trials, and what's also partnering with that and so important is that in the main these are safe and not only effective but safe therapeutics that show promise, and hopefully will then bring a return to investors and reward the kind of excitement and I think risk that's been taken to invest in these kind of therapeutics, which now exists over decades.
Speaking of therapeutics being delivered to patients, the most expensive therapeutic in the world is a gene therapy product by uniQure.
Yes, indeed.
Glybera. And they recently announced that they won't be going for reauthorization of the product because there's only been one case of usage by a patient and it's just too expensive.
Yes.
What are the pricing implications for cell and gene therapies, and how do we make it more affordable and more accessible for patients?
So many lessons learned from the example that you're mentioning here. So many lessons, but you've highlighted the question of how we commercialize these kind of therapeutics. And you know, it's one thing to suffer from a rare disease, I think, but the disease that you're referring to here, lipoprotein lipase deficiency, we refer to as an ultra-rare disease. So the reason why this was promoted and indeed taken on by an angel in Italy, if I understand the history of the development of uniQure, which passed through several phases in various iterations of different named companies through the EMA to get approval. And it was an enormous success. Indeed, efficacy was demonstrated to the extent that it convinced the EMA to allow this treatment to be available. And then, of course, the shock that it was a clinical success and a commercial dismal failure. And lessons, I think, must be learned from that, and clearly have been learned. And what we need to start to consider is that for extremely expensive and ultra-rare treatments, where there may be only 50 eligible patients in the whole of Europe, and 20 of them were in the clinical trial that led to the approval, in that kind of situation, perhaps we can consider a model where there's not just €1 million upfront payment, take it or leave it, but we're talking about the potential for a single treatment which may lead to a cure. And in that case, why can't we negotiate both an equitable arrangement between the company and the government, or the provider of the service, the insurers, wherein an upfront payment is paid, and then each year, for example, where treatment is maintaining evidence of efficacy, an additional payment is made. That way, there can be a partnership between the developer of the technology, reimbursement can be calculated, and of course we devote substantial amount of sessions and consideration to reimbursement right here at this meeting. So all of those aspects need to be considered, and the International Society of Cellular Therapies has a major commitment to commercialization as one of the pillars of our society, and working out how to pay for these rare treatments that are very, very expensive is one of the major goals of what we are doing by coming together with academics, translational physicians, commercialization expert, and of course the regulators who need to be sure it's done safely.
And speaking of ISCT, what's your involvement with the organisation and what drives you to be more involved?
I'm passionate about this society because of its commitment to patient care at its cornerstone and the bringing together of those pillars of commercialisation, academia, and of course the regulatory part of our team. And so when we come together, we bring the 5 main regional areas of the International Society for Cellular Therapies, represented by their vice presidents and their executives, coming together once every year, this is our 25th Jubilee meeting, to join with a commitment to promoting cellular therapies and cellular therapies partner gene therapies, in seeing that patient care is at our cornerstone and fundamentally driving that so that academia, translational medicine, commercialization, and indeed the regulatory and compliance people all have a voice in partnership with patient advocates, so that one day we can see a world where health is better, and we are all, I think, committed to that goal.
Today we're in the UK, in London, and I just want to focus on a regulatory advancement that happened in the UK last year in December.
Yes.
The UK government approved mitochondrial therapy with caution. What does that mean for the industry, and how does that translate to the rest of the world?
So mitochondrial therapy shows great promise, potentially for some very rare but extremely serious inherited disorders that affect these little batteries that are in all of our cells. So some babies are born with ineffective mitochondria, and they suffer often problems with deafness, muscle weakness, and eventually sometimes death prematurely. These are very, very severe diseases. And so the idea is that during conception, it might be possible to offer a third party's mitochondria in order to provide for those little batteries that would function normally but would otherwise be defective if they came from the mother who is suffering from that genetic disorder, who would pass it on. And so in order to provide for that, this idea of 3-parent babies has been very cautiously considered by ethicists, sociologists, physicians, academics, and so on, in order to cautiously, as you said, progress towards a point where we may be able to undertake these kind of experiments, and permission has been granted to allow those baby steps to go forward to allow those kind of therapeutic experiments to be undertaken. Now, when people hear about 3-parent babies, I think there's instantly a kind of a yuck factor. Ethically, one says, is that a good idea? Really? 3-parent babies? That doesn't sound natural. But when you see the suffering of the babies that are born with mitochondrial deficiency disorders, and you see the potential for this kind of therapy, then you realize that there are ethical guidelines that can be set that would guide the safe, effective, and ethical progress towards a day when we might be able to provide a beautiful young family with a healthy baby, when that would not otherwise be possible, because we know that that family might be predisposed to a mitochondrial myopathy or these other diseases that affect the mitochondria. Many dozens of diseases affecting the mitochondria, all potentially amenable to mitochondrial replacement therapy.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, and we look forward to hearing about your messages and your panel sessions on gene editing, to the editing of organelles, to organs and beyond.
Thank you.
In the next few days.
Much appreciated.
For more information about PharmaVentures, visit our website